The mountain man found her bleeding in the snow 3 miles from Medicine Bow, Wyoming. And the first thing he noticed was that she did not cry out or beg for help, even though her wagon had overturned and her horse had bolted into the wilderness. Ethan Keller had been tracking elk through the Medicine Bow Mountains when he spotted the overturned wagon, its contents scattered across the frozen ground like the broken pieces of someone's entire life. The woman sat against a boulder, her dark hair matted with blood, her hands pressed against a gash in her leg, and her gray eyes met his with a steady determination that made something shift in his chest. He dismounted from his horse, a massive bay gelding that had carried him through these mountains for 5 years, and approached slowly. She watched him come, her face pale but composed, and she said nothing as he knelt beside her. Most women would have been sobbing by now, begging him to save them, pleading for rescue. This one just looked at him with those calm gray eyes and waited. "That needs stitching," Ethan said, nodding at her leg. The gash was deep, cutting through her worn traveling dress and into the flesh beneath. Blood had soaked through the fabric she had pressed against it, but she had done a decent job of slowing the flow. "I know," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, though he could see the pain in the tightness around her mouth. "Do you have the supplies?" He nodded and went back to his horse, pulling out his medical kit. Living alone in the mountains had taught him to be prepared for anything. He had sewn up his own wounds more times than he could count, had pulled bullets from his shoulder and set his own broken bones. This would not be difficult. "This will hurt," he warned as he knelt beside her again, needle and thread in hand. "I understand," she said simply, and that was all. No protests, no fear, no pleading for him to be gentle. She just braced herself against the boulder and looked away while he worked. Ethan had spent the last 8 years in these mountains, living alone in a cabin he had built with his own hands, trapping and hunting and avoiding the company of other people. He had grown accustomed to silence, to the sound of wind through pine trees and the howl of wolves in the distance. He had forgotten what it felt like to be near another person, especially a woman. But as he stitched her wound, his large calloused hands steady and careful, he found himself aware of every breath she took, every small flinch she tried to hide. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with prettiness. Her face was all strong lines and determined angles, her mouth set in a firm line, her eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore a simple traveling dress that had seen better days, and her hands were rough with work. This was not some pampered city woman who had gotten lost on her way to a tea party. This was someone who knew hardship, who had survived things that would have broken softer people. "What is your name?" he asked as he tied off the last stitch. "Clara James," she said. "And thank you." "Ethan Keller." He wrapped her leg with clean bandages from his pack, then sat back on his heels. "What are you doing out here alone?" "I was traveling to Medicine Bow. I have a teaching position waiting for me there." She looked at the overturned wagon, at the books and clothing scattered across the snow. "I suppose I will be late now." "You will be dead if you try to walk on that leg," Ethan said bluntly. "And your wagon is not going anywhere without a horse to pull it." "Then I will wait here until someone else comes along," Clara said, and there was no complaint in her voice, no self-pity. She simply stated it as a fact, as if waiting alone in the freezing mountains was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Ethan studied her for a long moment. The temperature would drop below freezing once the sun went down, and she had no fire, no shelter, no way to survive the night. Most people would be begging him to help them by now, clutching at his coat and pleading. But Clara James just sat there, waiting patiently, asking for nothing. Something about that bothered him more than any amount of begging would have. "My cabin is 2 hours from here," he said finally. "You can stay there until your leg heals enough to travel." I could not impose, Clara said immediately. You have already done so much. It is not an imposition. It is survival. Ethan stood and began gathering her scattered belongings, stuffing them into his saddlebags. You will die if you stay here, and I am not in the habit of letting people die when I can prevent it. She opened her mouth as if to protest again, then closed it. He saw her look at the darkening sky, at the scattered contents of her wagon, at her bandaged leg. She was practical enough to know he was right, even if she did not want to accept help. Thank you, she said quietly. I am grateful. Ethan helped her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her. She sat stiffly in front of him, clearly uncomfortable with the closeness, but she said nothing as he turned the horse toward home. The ride was silent except for the sound of hooves crunching through snow and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. His cabin appeared through the trees like something out of a dream, solid and sturdy, built from logs he had cut himself. Smoke rose from the chimney, evidence of the fire he had left burning that morning. He had built a good life here, simple and solitary, and he had not expected to share it with anyone. But as he helped Clara down from the horse and supported her weight while she hobbled inside, he found himself glad she was here. The cabin suddenly felt less empty, less like a hiding place and more like a home. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A bed in one corner, a table and chairs near the fire, shelves lined with supplies and ammunition. Clara looked around with those calm gray eyes, taking it all in without judgment. You should rest, Ethan said, gesturing to the bed. That leg needs time to heal. Where will you sleep? Clara asked. I have blankets. I will sleep by the fire. I cannot take your bed, she protested. You have already done too much. You are injured, Ethan said firmly. You get the bed. That is not negotiable. For a moment he thought she would argue, but then she nodded and limped toward the bed. He turned away to give her privacy while she settled in, busying himself with building up the fire and preparing food. Venison stew, simple but hot, flavored with wild herbs he had gathered in the summer. They ate in silence, Clara sitting on the edge of the bed, Ethan at the table. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and he noticed that she finished every bit in her bowl. Someone who did not waste food, who understood the value of every meal. How long have you lived here? Clara asked when she had finished. 8 years, Ethan said. I came here after the war. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Many men had fled to the mountains after the war, seeking solitude and peace after years of violence. She did not ask which side he had fought for, and he was grateful for that. What about you? He asked. Where did you come from? Denver, Clara said. I was teaching there, but the school closed. Medicine Bow offered me a position. She looked down at her hands. I needed a fresh start. There was something in her voice, some old pain she did not speak of, and Ethan did not press. They were both here in these mountains for reasons they did not want to discuss, both running from pasts they could not change. That was enough understanding between them. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Ethan would wake early and tend to his traps, hunting for food and checking his supplies. He would return to find Clara awake, the cabin tidied as much as she could manage while staying off her injured leg. She never asked him to do anything for her, never complained about the pain or the inconvenience. She simply existed in his space with a quiet grace that he found increasingly appealing. He began to anticipate things she might need before she had to ask. When he noticed her shivering one morning, he brought in extra wood and built up the fire higher. When he saw her eyeing the books scattered around the cabin, he brought them to her bedside without a word. When her bandages needed changing, he had clean cloth and salve ready before she could mention it. It became a kind of game for him, watching her carefully, learning to read the small signs that indicated what she needed. A slight wince meant her leg was hurting, so he would brew willow bark tea for the pain. A distant look in her eyes meant she was worried about getting to Medicine Bow, so he would assure her that her job would wait. A sigh meant she was feeling restless, so he would tell her stories about the mountains and the animals he had encountered. Clara seemed puzzled by this at first, glancing at him with those storm-gray eyes whenever he appeared with something she had been thinking about but had not asked for. But she never questioned it, just accepted each small gesture with quiet thanks. On the 5th day, she was strong enough to sit at the table for meals. Ethan made rabbit stew, thick and rich, and watched as she ate. She had more color in her cheeks now, and the haunted look had faded from her eyes. She was healing, and he found himself both glad and sad about that. Glad because she was recovering, sad because it meant she would leave soon. "You are a good cook," Clara said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I have had a lot of practice," Ethan replied. "Living alone, you learn to make do." "It must be lonely," Clara said softly. Ethan considered this. For 8 years, he had told himself he preferred the solitude, that he was better off without other people complicating his life. But now, sitting across from this quiet woman who asked for nothing and accepted everything with grace, he realized that loneliness had become so familiar he had stopped noticing it. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it is peaceful." "Peace is different from happiness," Clara observed, and there was wisdom in her words that made him look at her more closely. "Are you happy?" he asked. She was quiet for a long time, her spoon moving slowly through her stew. "I am trying to be," she said finally. "I think happiness is something you have to work toward, like building a house or learning a skill. It does not just appear." Ethan thought about this as he cleaned up their dishes. He had spent 8 years in these mountains, telling himself he was content, but contentment was not the same as happiness. He had built a life of survival, of getting by, of existing, but Clara was right. That was not the same as truly living. That night, as he lay by the fire and listened to her quiet breathing from the bed, he realized something had changed in him. The cabin no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a home because she was in it. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Clara standing by the window, her weight carefully balanced to keep pressure off her injured leg. She was looking out at the snow-covered mountains, her expression thoughtful. "Your leg," he said, getting up quickly. "You should not be standing." "It feels better," Clara said. "I wanted to see the sunrise." He came to stand beside her, looking out at the pink and gold light spreading across the peaks. It was beautiful, but he found himself watching her face instead of the view, seeing the wonder in her eyes, the small smile on her lips. "It is lovely here," she said softly. "I can see why you stayed." "It grows on you," Ethan said. Then, surprising himself, he added, "I could show you more of it when your leg is healed. There is a waterfall about a mile from here that freezes in the winter. It is worth seeing." Clara turned to look at him, those gray eyes searching his face. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but understood. They were no longer just a rescuer and the rescued, no longer just two strangers sharing a cabin. They were becoming something more, something neither of them had expected. Over the following days, Ethan found more reasons to stay close to the cabin. His traps could wait. The hunting could be done later. What mattered was being near Clara, talking to her, learning about her. He discovered she had lost her parents to fever when she was young, that she had raised her younger brother until he was old enough to strike out on his own. She had been teaching for 6 years, moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Why not? Ethan asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Clara in the chair he had pulled close for her, him on the floor with his back against the wall. I suppose I was always waiting for something, Clara said, staring into the flames. Waiting to feel like I belonged somewhere, but I never did. And Medicine Bow, he asked, do you think you will belong there? She was quiet for a long moment. I thought so, she said finally, but now I am not so certain. Ethan wanted to ask what had changed, but he was afraid he already knew the answer. Something was growing between them, something fragile and precious, and he did not want to push too hard and break it. Instead, he stood and went to the shelf where he kept his few books. He pulled down a volume of poetry, worn and well-read, and brought it to her. You might like this, he said. Clara took the book with gentle hands, opening it carefully. Her eyes widened as she read the inscription on the first page. This belonged to your mother, she said softly. Yes. Ethan sat back down, watching her. She loved poetry, used to read to me every night when I was young. Where is she now? Clara asked. Gone. Both my parents died of cholera 15 years ago. He said it matter-of-factly, the pain of it dulled by time. That book is one of the few things I have left of them. Clara looked at him with such understanding in her eyes that it made his chest tight. And you are sharing it with me, she said. Yes, he said simply. She read for a while, her voice soft as she recited some of the poems aloud. Ethan closed his eyes and listened, letting her words wash over him. It had been so long since he had heard poetry, since he had shared this part of himself with anyone. It felt right, having her here, hearing his mother's favorite words spoken in Clara's gentle voice. When she finished, Clara closed the book carefully and held it against her chest. Thank you, she said, for sharing this with me, for sharing everything. You never ask for anything, Ethan said, the words coming out before he could stop them. You never demand or expect. You just accept whatever comes with grace. I have never known anyone like that before. Clara looked surprised. I learned early that asking for things only leads to disappointment, she said. It is better to be grateful for what you have than to wish for what you do not. But you deserve things, Ethan said, leaning forward. You deserve kindness and comfort and care. You do not have to earn them by being quiet and undemanding. Maybe, Clara said softly, but I have found that people give more freely when you do not ask. Like you. You have given me so much without me having to say a word. Ethan realized she was right. He had been watching her, learning her needs, providing for her without being asked. It had become natural to him, anticipating what she might want, making sure she had everything she needed. He had learned to give because she had never demanded it. I want to take care of you, he said, and the admission felt like stepping off a cliff. Not because you need it, but because I want to. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. Why? She whispered. Because in 8 years of living alone, I have never felt less lonely than I have these past 10 days, Ethan said. Because you fit here in this cabin in these mountains. Because when I think about you leaving, something in me hurts. Ethan, she breathed, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were small and delicate compared to his, but they were strong, the hands of someone who had worked hard and survived hardship. Stay, he said. Do not go to Medicine Bow. Stay here with me. I barely know you, Clara said, but there was longing in her voice. Then we will learn each other, Ethan said. We will take our time, but stay. Give this a chance. Give us a chance. Clara looked at him for a long moment, her gray eyes searching his face. He let her look, let her see everything he felt, all the loneliness and hope and growing love he could no longer hide. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I will stay. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen for 8 long years. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, reverently. I will make you happy, he promised. I will give you everything you need before you even know you need it. You already do, Clara whispered. And then she was leaning forward and he was reaching up and their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, feeling the softness of her skin, the warmth of her breath. She tasted like hope and new beginnings, and he knew in that moment that he would never let her go. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "So afraid to want this, to want you." "No more fear," Ethan said. "I have you now and I am not letting go." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the fire crackling beside them and the wind howling outside. The cabin felt warm and safe, a refuge from the harsh world beyond its walls. Over the next few weeks, Clara's leg healed completely, and Ethan kept his promise to show her the frozen waterfall. They bundled up in furs and rode his horse through the snow-covered forest, Clara sitting in front of him, his arms around her waist. When they reached the waterfall, she gasped in wonder. The water had frozen mid-fall, creating a sculpture of ice that caught the sunlight and threw rainbows across the snow. "It is magical," Clara breathed, and Ethan tightened his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Not as magical as you," he murmured against her ear, and she turned to kiss him, her cold lips warming against his. They explored the mountains together, Ethan showing her all his favorite places. The meadow where elk came to graze in the spring. The cave where he had sheltered during a particularly bad storm. The ridge where you could see for miles in every direction, the whole world spread out below like a painting. Clara absorbed it all with quiet joy, never complaining about the cold or the difficult terrain. She learned to move through the mountains like he did, reading the signs of weather and wildlife, understanding the rhythms of this wild place. And Ethan learned to open himself to her, sharing stories about his childhood, his time in the war, the reasons he had fled to the mountains in the first place. "I killed men," he told her one night as they lay in bed together, fully clothed but wrapped in each other's arms. He had given her the bed and taken the floor for weeks, but gradually they had moved closer until they were sharing the space, seeking each other's warmth and comfort. "I saw terrible things, did terrible things. When the war ended, I could not go back to living among people who had not seen what I had seen, so I came here." "And now," Clara asked softly, her hand resting over his heart. "Now I think maybe I was just waiting," Ethan said. "Waiting for a reason to come back to life, waiting for you." Clara kissed him then, deep and sweet, and Ethan felt the last of his walls crumble. He had thought he wanted solitude, but what he had really wanted was someone who understood, someone who had also survived pain and loss and come out the other side still able to hope. Winter deepened around them, and they settled into a comfortable routine. Ethan hunted and trapped, bringing home meat and furs. Clara cooked and cleaned, turning the cabin into a real home with small touches he had never thought to add. Wildflowers dried and hung from the rafters. Curtains sewn from extra fabric to soften the windows. His mother's poetry book placed carefully on a shelf where they could both reach it. She never asked him for any of these things, never suggested changes to his space. But Ethan watched and learned, seeing what would make her happy, what would make the cabin feel more like theirs instead of his. He built her a bookshelf for the books they had salvaged from her wagon. He fashioned a chair by the window where the light was best for reading. He brought her wildflower seeds so she could plant a garden in the spring. Each gift was given without fanfare, just placed where she would find it, and each time Clara would look at him with those gray eyes full of wonder and love. "You do not have to do all this," she would say, and he would reply, "I know. I want to." Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow melting to reveal green grass and early wildflowers. Clara planted her garden, kneeling in the dirt with her hands deep in the soil, and Ethan worked beside her, helping prepare the ground. They worked in comfortable silence, moving together like they had been doing this for years instead of months. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, Clara said, "I should send word to Medicine Bow. Tell them I will not be taking the teaching position." "Are you certain?" Ethan asked, though his heart leaped at the thought of her staying permanently. "I have never been more certain of anything," Clara said. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "This is where I belong, with you." Ethan pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I will ride to Medicine Bow tomorrow, post the letter and pick up supplies." He paused, then added, "Maybe get a few other things." "What other things?" Clara asked, looking up at him curiously. "You will see," Ethan said with a small smile. The next day he rode to Medicine Bow, a full day's journey each way. He posted Clara's letter and bought supplies, but he also stopped at the jeweler's shop. The selection was limited in a small frontier town, but he found what he was looking for. A simple gold band, plain but well made, exactly the kind of thing Clara would appreciate. When he returned to the cabin the following evening, Clara rushed out to meet him, relief written all over her face. "I was worried," she said, throwing her arms around him. "You were gone so long." "The ride takes time," Ethan said, holding her close and breathing in the scent of her hair. "But I am back now." They unpacked the supplies together, and Clara exclaimed over the fabric he had bought for a new dress, the books he had found at the general store, the coffee beans that were a rare luxury. She did not notice the small box he tucked into his pocket, saving it for the right moment. That moment came a week later, on an evening when the mountains were painted with the last light of day, and the air smelled of pine and wildflowers. They had finished dinner and were sitting on the porch, Clara in the chair he had made for her, Ethan on the steps at her feet. "Clara," he said, turning to look up at her, "I have something for you." "Ethan, you have already given me so much," Clara protested, but he shook his head. "This is different," he said. He pulled out the small box and opened it, showing her the gold band inside. "I know we have only known each other for a few months. I know this is fast. But I also know that I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning new ways to make you happy." "Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, and this time she let them fall. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, pouring all his love and devotion into that kiss. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his long hair, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing and crying at once. "When?" Clara asked. "As soon as possible," Ethan said. "We can ride to Medicine Bow next week, find a preacher." "Next week," Clara agreed, and she kissed him again. They were married in Medicine Bow on a sunny day in late May. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with only a handful of witnesses. Clara wore the new dress Ethan had bought fabric for, which she had sewn herself in the evenings by candlelight. It was blue, the color of a summer sky, and it made her eyes look even more striking. Ethan wore his best shirt and pants, his long hair tied back, his beard trimmed. He had scrubbed himself clean at the hotel, wanting to look his best for her. When Clara walked down the aisle toward him, his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, radiant, and she was choosing him. They said their vows with steady voices and sure hearts. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Ethan kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man in the world. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, a rare luxury after months in the cabin. Ethan carried Clara over the threshold of their room, both of them laughing, and set her down gently. Then he cupped her face in his hands and looked at her, really looked at her, memorizing this moment. "I love you," he said, "more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Clara whispered. "You taught me that it is okay to want things, to accept care and love. You taught me that I deserve to be happy." "You taught me to live again," Ethan said, "to want more than just survival, to hope." They came together slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts. Ethan was careful and gentle, wanting to make sure Clara felt nothing but pleasure and love. She responded to his touch with a passion that matched his own, and when they finally joined together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like they had been made for each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the hotel bed, skin against skin, hearts beating in sync. Clara traced patterns on Ethan's chest, following the scars he had earned in the war and in the mountains. "Tell me about this one," she would say, and he would tell her the story. She never flinched or pulled away, just listened and learned, accepting every part of him. They returned to the cabin as husband and wife, and life settled into a new rhythm. The garden Clara had planted flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables through the summer. Ethan's trapping continued to bring in income, and they made occasional trips to Medicine Bow to sell furs and buy supplies. But the best part was simply being together. Ethan would come home from checking his traps to find Clara working in the garden or cooking dinner or reading on the porch, and his heart would swell with love every time. She belonged here, in this wild place with him. He continued his habit of anticipating her needs, and Clara continued to accept his care with grace and gratitude. When he noticed her eyeing the wild strawberries growing near the creek, he spent an afternoon picking them for her. When she mentioned that she missed singing, he brought home a harmonica from Medicine Bow and learned to play so they could make music together in the evenings. When the nights grew cold, he built up the fire and wrapped her in furs, holding her close until she was warm. Clara gave back in her own quiet ways. She mended his clothes without being asked. She made his favorite meals. She listened to his stories and shared her own, creating a tapestry of shared memories and experiences. And she loved him with a fierceness that still surprised him sometimes, this quiet woman who asked for nothing but gave everything. Summer faded into autumn, and the mountains blazed with color. Ethan and Clara walked through the forests hand in hand, collecting nuts and berries, preparing for winter. They had been married for 4 months, and Ethan could not imagine life without her. One evening in late September, Clara came to him with a shy smile on her face and her hand resting on her stomach. "Ethan," she said softly, "I am going to have a baby." For a moment, Ethan could not breathe. Then he was crossing the cabin in 2 long strides and sweeping her into his arms, careful not to hold her too tight. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at once. "I am certain." Ethan set her down carefully and placed his large hand over her still flat stomach, imagining the tiny life growing inside her. His child. Their child. A family. "I am going to be a father," he said, wonder in his voice. "You are going to be an amazing father," Clara said, placing her hand over his. "Just like you are an amazing husband." That winter was harder than the previous one, not because of the weather, but because Ethan worried constantly about Clara and the baby. He became even more attentive, if that was possible, watching her for any sign of discomfort or need. He made sure the cabin was always warm, that she had plenty of food, that she never had to lift anything heavy or do anything that might endanger her or the child. Clara accepted his care with patience and love, understanding that this was how he showed his devotion. She grew round and beautiful with pregnancy, and Ethan would spend hours with his hand on her belly, feeling their baby move and kick. "What do you hope for?" Clara asked one night as they lay in bed, Ethan's hand resting on her swollen stomach. "A boy or a girl, I do not care," Ethan said honestly. "As long as you are both healthy, I will be happy with either." "I think a boy," Clara said softly. "A boy who will grow up strong and kind like his father." Ethan kissed her, slow and deep. "And gentle and wise like his mother," he added. The baby came in early March on a day when the snow was falling softly outside the cabin. Ethan had ridden to Medicine Bow 2 weeks earlier to bring back the midwife, a stern older woman named Mrs. Patterson, who agreed to stay at the cabin until the baby arrived. When Clara's labor began, Ethan paced the cabin like a caged mountain lion, desperate to help but knowing there was nothing he could do. "Stop wearing a hole in my floor and come hold your wife's hand," Mrs. Patterson ordered, and Ethan obeyed immediately. He sat beside Clara, holding her hand while she labored, whispering words of love and encouragement. She was strong and brave, just as he knew she would be, and when their son finally entered the world with a loud, healthy cry, Ethan felt tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he whispered, kissing Clara's sweaty forehead. "You did it, love." Clara smiled wearily, reaching for their son. Mrs. Patterson placed the baby in her arms, and Clara looked down at him with so much love that Ethan's heart felt too big for his chest. The baby was perfect, with a thick thatch of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "What shall we name him?" Clara asked, looking up at Ethan. Ethan studied his son, this tiny perfect being that he and Clara had created together. "James," he said. "After you, James Keller." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "James," she repeated. "It is perfect." Mrs. Patterson stayed for a week, making sure Clara and the baby were healthy and showing Ethan how to help care for his son. Then she returned to Medicine Bow, leaving the new family alone in their mountain cabin. Ethan had thought he understood love before, but fatherhood taught him new depths of feeling. He would watch his son sleeping in the cradle he had built, this tiny, vulnerable person who depended on him completely, and feel overwhelmed with the need to protect and provide. He learned to change diapers and soothe crying and walk the floor at midnight when James would not sleep. And through it all, Clara was there beside him, patient and loving, teaching him how to be a father the way he had taught her it was okay to accept care. They were partners in every way, building a life together in the mountains, raising their son with love and dedication. As James grew from infant to toddler, the cabin rang with laughter and joy. He was a happy child, curious and adventurous like his father, gentle and thoughtful like his mother. Ethan taught him about the mountains, how to track animals and read the weather. Clara taught him letters and numbers, reading to him from the poetry book that had belonged to Ethan's mother. When James was 2 years old, Clara came to Ethan again with that same shy smile. "We are going to have another baby," she said. This time, Ethan was prepared. He knew what to expect, knew how to care for his pregnant wife, knew the wonder and terror of bringing a new life into the world. Their daughter was born in the autumn when the aspens were golden and the air was crisp with coming winter. They named her Emma, and she was as fierce and determined as her mother, even as an infant. Life in the cabin was busy with 2 small children, but it was also full of love and laughter. Ethan built an addition onto the cabin, giving them more space. He taught James to fish in the creek and helped Emma take her first steps. He continued to trap and hunt, providing for his growing family, and he thanked God every day for the chance encounter that had brought Clara into his life. Clara thrived as a mother and wife. She had found the belonging she had always searched for, the home she had never had. She taught the children herself, turning their cabin into a small schoolhouse. She tended her garden and preserved food for winter and filled their home with warmth and love. And through it all, Ethan continued to anticipate her needs, giving before she had to ask. When he noticed her looking tired, he would take the children outside so she could rest. When he saw her missing her teaching, he brought home books from medicine, but so she could continue educating their children. When the winters felt too long and isolated, he would plan special outings, bundling the whole family up and taking them to the frozen waterfall or to town for supplies and company. Clara never had to ask for anything because Ethan had learned to see what she needed and provide it. And in return, Clara gave him a love so deep and steady that he never doubted it, never questioned it. She had taught him that real love was not demanding or needy. It was quiet and constant, accepting and giving in equal measure. Years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. James grew into a strong young boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Emma became a bright spark of energy, asking questions about everything and reading every book she could get her hands on. And when Clara announced a third pregnancy, Ethan just laughed and pulled her close, knowing that their family would only grow more complete. Their third child, another boy they named Daniel, was born when James was 8 and Emma was 6. He was a calm, peaceful baby, content to watch the world around him with wide, curious eyes. The cabin that had once held only Ethan's solitary existence now burst with life and love. It was exactly what he had never known he wanted, exactly what he had needed without realizing it. Clara had brought him back to life, had taught him that isolation was not the same as peace, that real happiness came from connection and love. One evening, when James was 10 and helping his father check traps, the boy asked, "How did you meet Mama?" Ethan smiled, remembering that day 12 years ago when he had found Clara bleeding in the snow, asking for nothing, accepting everything with quiet grace. "I found her when she needed help," he said, "and she saved me right back." "But you saved her," James said, confused. "You told me you stitched her leg and brought her here." "I did," Ethan agreed, "but she saved me in a different way. She saved me from loneliness, from living a half-life. She taught me what it means to really love someone, to give without being asked, to care without expecting anything in return." James thought about this for a moment. "Is that why you always know what Mama needs? Why you bring her flowers before she asks, or build things for her without her saying anything?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Your mother never asks for anything. She is content with whatever she has, grateful for every small thing. So I learned to watch and listen, to see what would make her happy and provide it before she even realized she wanted it." "That is what love is," James said, understanding dawning in his young eyes. "Not making someone ask. Just giving." "Exactly," Ethan said, ruffling his son's hair. "You are a smart boy." That night, after the children were in bed, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch as they often did, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Clara was knitting a blanket for Daniel, her hands moving steadily, and Ethan was working on a piece of leather, making a new holster for his rifle. "James asked me today how we met," Ethan said. Clara smiled. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I found you in the snow and you saved my life." "I think you have that backward," Clara said. "You saved me." "We saved each other," Ethan corrected. He set down his work and reached for her hand. "Clara, do you have any idea how much I love you? How grateful I am that your wagon overturned that day." "I am grateful too," Clara said softly. "Even though it was terrifying at the time. If it had not happened, I would have gone to Medicine Bow, taught at that school, and never known what it felt like to really be home." "You are my home," Ethan said. "You and the children. This life we have built together. I spent 8 years in these mountains thinking I was content, but I was just surviving. You taught me how to live." Clara set down her knitting and moved to sit on Ethan's lap, something she still did even after all these years, even after 3 children and countless trials. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up your solitude, having this noisy, chaotic family?" "Never," Ethan said firmly. "Not for one single second. Every loud morning and every exhausting evening, every scraped knee and every late night with a sick child, I am grateful for all of it. Because it means I have you. It means I have them. It means I have a life worth living." "I love you," Clara whispered. "So much." "I love you too," Ethan said. "More now than I did the day we married, and more tomorrow than I do today." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the sounds of their children sleeping inside the cabin, feeling the cool mountain breeze on their faces. This was happiness, Ethan thought. Not the absence of trouble or hardship, but the presence of love and family and purpose. As the children grew older, they each developed their own personalities and interests. James became an expert tracker and hunter, following in his father's footsteps. Emma inherited her mother's love of learning and asked to be sent to school in Medicine Bow when she was 12. It broke Ethan's heart to let her go, but Clara convinced him it was the right thing to do. "She needs more than we can teach her here," Clara said. "She needs to see the world, to learn from other people. We can give her that opportunity." So Emma went to live with a family in Medicine Bow during the school year, coming home in the summers. She flourished in school, excelling in all her subjects, and she wrote long letters home describing everything she was learning. Ethan saved every letter, proud of his bright, ambitious daughter. Daniel was the quiet one, content to help his mother in the garden and read by the fire. He had a gift for drawing, and Ethan brought home paper and pencils from Medicine, but so Daniel could develop his talent. The cabin walls became covered with Daniel's sketches of mountains and animals and family portraits. When James turned 18, he announced that he wanted to go to Denver to learn about business. "I want to start a trading company," he said. "Buy furs and goods from trappers and sell them in the cities. I could help a lot of people, Papa, and make a good living." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to keep his son close, but he remembered his own father letting him go when he needed to find his own path. "If that is what you want," he said, "then you have my blessing." James left in the spring, and the cabin felt emptier without him. But he wrote regularly, full of excitement about his new ventures, and he came home to visit whenever he could. Within 2 years, his trading company was successful, and he had married a kind young woman named Sarah who made him happy. Emma finished school and became a teacher in Medicine Bow, just as Clara had once planned to do. She married a doctor, a good man who loved her fierce spirit and brilliant mind. They had 2 daughters, and Emma brought them to visit the mountain cabin often, wanting her children to know their grandparents and the wild beauty of the place where she had grown up. Daniel stayed close to home longest, but eventually even he felt the pull of the wider world. He went to study art in San Francisco, sending home paintings that captured the beauty of the ocean and the city. He never married, but he had a full life, teaching art and creating beauty wherever he went. And through it all, Ethan and Clara remained in their mountain cabin, growing older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Their hair turned gray, their hands grew gnarled with age, but the way they looked at each other never changed. Ethan still anticipated Clara's needs, still gave before she had to ask. Clara still accepted his care with grace and gratitude, still loved him with that quiet, constant devotion that had first drawn him to her. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children came home for a celebration. James and Sarah brought their 3 children. Emma and her husband brought their daughters. Daniel came from San Francisco with paintings for everyone. The cabin was full of noise and laughter and love, 3 generations gathered together. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan and Clara slipped outside to sit on the porch one more time. They were both in their 50s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard mountain living, but they were still strong and healthy. 30 years, Clara said, taking Ethan's hand. Can you believe it? Best 30 years of my life, Ethan said. Though I cannot believe I am old enough to be a grandfather, Clara laughed. We earned every gray hair. Worth it, Ethan said. He looked at their cabin, warm light glowing from the windows, hearing the soft sounds of their family sleeping inside. All of it was worth it. Do you remember what you said to me the day you proposed? Clara asked. I said I would give you everything you needed before you even knew you needed it, Ethan said. You kept that promise, Clara said softly. Every single day for 30 years, you have given me more than I ever dared to hope for. You made it easy, Ethan said. You never asked for anything, never demanded or expected. You just loved me, accepted me, gave me a home and a family and a purpose. How could I not want to give you everything? We did well, did we not? Clara asked, gesturing at the cabin, at the mountains beyond, at the life they had built. We did better than well, Ethan said. We did perfect. They sat together until the stars came out, holding hands, content in the comfortable silence they had shared for 3 decades. This was what love looked like, Ethan thought. Not the passionate fireworks of youth, though they had had those too, but the steady, constant warmth of 2 people who had chosen each other every day for 30 years and would continue choosing each other for whatever time they had left. More years passed. Their grandchildren grew and had children of their own. The cabin that had once held only Ethan's loneliness became the gathering place for 4 generations of family. Ethan and Clara aged gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp, their love still strong. On a summer evening when they were both in their late 60s, Clara fell ill. It started as a simple cough, but developed into something more serious. Ethan tended to her with the same careful attention he had shown when he first stitched her wound all those years ago. He brewed healing teas and kept her warm and sat by her bedside reading poetry from his mother's old book. I am not ready to go yet, Clara whispered one night when the fever was high. I want more time with you. Then fight, Ethan said, gripping her hand. Fight and stay with me. I am not ready to let you go either. Clara fought, and slowly, over the course of several weeks, she recovered. But the illness had weakened her, and Ethan knew that their time together was no longer infinite. He became even more attentive, if that was possible, anticipating not just her needs but her desires, making sure every day they had left was full of love and joy. He brought her flowers every morning from her beloved garden. He carried her to the porch so she could watch the sunset over the mountains. He held her hand and told her stories about their life together, reminding her of all the beautiful moments they had shared. And Clara accepted it all with the same quiet grace she had always shown, loving him with every breath she took. They lived another 5 years after Clara's illness, 5 years of appreciating every moment, every conversation, every touch. Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling the cabin with life and laughter, but the quiet moments were still the best. Just Ethan and Clara, sitting together, needing no words to communicate the depth of their love. When Clara finally passed, it was peacefully in her sleep, with Ethan's arms around her. She was 73 years old, and they had been married for 45 years. Ethan held her body and wept, grieving the loss of the woman who had saved him, who had taught him how to love, who had given him a life beyond his wildest dreams. He buried her on the mountain, in a spot where she could see the frozen waterfall and the meadow where the elk grazed. He carved her headstone himself, working for weeks to make it perfect. It read simply, "Clara James Keller, beloved wife and mother, she asked for nothing and gave everything." Ethan lived 3 more years after Clara's death, staying in the cabin they had shared, tending her garden, visiting her grave every day. His children begged him to come live with them, but he refused. This was where he belonged, where they had built their life together. He would not leave it now. On a cold winter morning, with snow falling softly outside just as it had been the day he found Clara all those decades ago, Ethan died in his sleep. He was 76 years old, and his last thoughts were of his wife, wondering if she was waiting for him somewhere beyond this life. James found him when he came for his weekly visit. His father looked peaceful, a small smile on his weathered face, as if he had seen something wonderful in his final moments. James wept for his father, but he was also glad. Glad that his parents had loved each other so completely, glad that they had built such a beautiful life together, glad that they were together again now, wherever they were. They buried Ethan next to Clara on the mountain, and the entire family came for the funeral. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all the descendants of that chance meeting in the snow 48 years ago. They stood together on the mountain and shared stories about Ethan and Clara, about the love they had witnessed, the lessons they had learned. "He taught us what it means to really love someone," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "To give without being asked, to care without expecting anything in return." "And Mama taught us to accept love with grace," James added. "To be grateful for what we have, to never take anything for granted." "They were perfect together," Daniel said. "Two halves of a whole, teaching each other how to be better, how to love more deeply." The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations, a reminder of the love story that had begun there. Great-great-grandchildren would visit and hear the tale of how their great-great-grandfather had found their great-great-grandmother bleeding in the snow, and how she had never asked for anything, teaching him to give before she had to ask. They would learn about the life built in that cabin, the family raised there, the love that had sustained them through everything. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the snow was falling and the mountains were bathed in the last light of day, people swore they could feel that love still lingering in the cabin, warm and constant and eternal. The love of a mountain man who had learned to give and a quiet woman who had taught him how. The love that had transformed a lonely cabin into a home, that had created a family from nothing, that had proved that the strongest love is the kind that anticipates needs and gives freely, asking nothing in return. Their story became legend in Medicine Bow, passed down through the years as an example of what true love looked like. Not the flashy romance of novels, but the steady, constant devotion of two people who had chosen each other every day, who had built a life together through hard work and sacrifice and unwavering commitment. A love that had started with a chance encounter and grown into something that outlasted even death, living on in the family they had created and the lessons they had taught. And so the mountain man and the woman who never asked for anything lived on, not just in memory, but in the lives of everyone they had touched, everyone they had loved, everyone who had witnessed the beauty of a love that gave everything and asked for nothing in return. Their story was complete, their love eternal, their legacy secured in the hearts of those who came after them.